Hello, everybody. Stu Smith and Jeff Nichols here, back with another tactical fitness report. And today we're going to discuss something that probably has been neglected, over the years that Jeff and I have been talking about this. And, we always talk about, your body height, your height and your weight, for going to buds, what's ideal. To be honest with you, there's not really an ideal body weight. There are statistics that drive a bell curve that you're going to have the average size guy right there in the middle. Most of them are just average size guys. And then if you're below average, you have a little bit of a chance to make it. If you're above average big guy, you have a little bit of a chance to make it. So, you triggered this one in one of our last podcasts, Jeff. You said nobody really talks about the big guy who is 6'4", 220 as being tough as nails and just an animal. You always talk about the little guy who's tough as nails and just crushes everything. So, or just wouldn't get crushed by things. And, I got to thinking back in my days, whether it was through sports or through working manual labor jobs, there was just always those people that were small framed, but they had muscle. If they had clothes on, you would say, he's a skinny guy, but they take their shirt off and they're just ripped with no body fat and just got some muscle mass for their skeletal system that works really well for them. So I would kind of define that guy as wiry strong. So that's kind of my idea on this one, Jeff. Where do you come off with the small guy that's just wiry strong?
Yeah, like for me, like it's like you probably have these conversations too with athletes. When you encounter someone like this, you're going to inevitably ask, like, what's your history been? Like, what's your life history been? What sports have you played? And I've never encountered, not that it's not possible, because I've never encountered somebody who's led a sedentary lifestyle that is this wiry character. I've never met that. I've never met a sedentary, wiry, strong person that we look up and admire their ability. What that person is like an example is someone that grew up doing farm work their whole life. And then they show up at buds and they're like, oh, this physical labor stuff, I got it. Or entire life they were doing sport after sport after sport, like you and I. Yeah. Right. So like you and I at 18, 19 years old, we may not have been the biggest we've ever been, certainly, but our muscle quality exists because of those life experiences of sports or whatever it is. And that's what we're trying to give you a perspective of where different people come into selection, right? We're saying this big guy, this 220 pounds, 6'4". Well, those numbers are relative to his life experiences to include the sports he's played. So when someone says like, hey, I'm a wiry guy, I'm a big guy, this, you hear things like Stu and I go like, well, you need to be bigger, you need to be this. That comes from our context of years of hearing this. So, when I hear of a wiry small guy, a guy that's tough, this, that, and the other, I'm not necessarily even looking at, obviously their ability is good. But for me, what I'm going to do is ask, what's been your history? Like that's what I'm looking for, because all of that gives me information. And what that information constantly says is that 18-year-olds don't have enough life experiences based on their timing of puberty and the stressors. It has nothing to do with like an 18-year-old's willingness to be stressed out. They just didn't have that life, And so that's kind of what I guess my really soapbox speech is like. It's not really a point other than saying like, when we're saying you're big, too small, or where we say you need to gain weight, that's come a lot of history from us. But what we're just saying is that whoever is ready, they just put they just follow a process. And that's what's missing. It doesn't matter if you're 220 and 6'2" and fit, you're going to be fine. If you're 150 and super fit because you grew up wrestling and playing all these sports, you're going to be fine, right? Like that's the thing is, a lot of people that find themselves ready sooner for selection, it's typically merely that they just grew up playing sports, or they were super active in like a construction farm, something.
Yes.
And all we're trying to do, Stu and I, is get people to make up that work difference compared to the population that has worked their whole life or played sports their whole life. And now you've got a guy that's 16 that's hasn't played a lot of sports, hasn't been super active. That is where this, hey, you're too small, you're too big, you need to lose weight, you need to get stronger, comes from that demographic. So
Yeah.
just understand that too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I just look back at, when people say, hey, I'm, 5'7", 150 pounds, I have seen 5'7", 150-pound guys make it through. I mean,
Yes.
it's not something that I think, there's a yes or no to that answer. It can happen, absolutely. However, that kid worked his entire life. When he wasn't working, he was playing sports. He was just always active. And he just created a body for himself that was lean and mean and just wiry. I don't have a
Yeah.
better
And
word
not like,
for it.
it's not work adverse. And that, if I can define that, like a body that's not work adverse is somebody that's not going to like, let me say this. I kind of did this in Instagram live yesterday where people ask a question. They're like, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is my plan. Da, 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 da. If it doesn't work, like they already have this plan in their head that the plan they're following isn't going to work.
Ouch.
And then you're like, well, why are you going down this path anyway? Like stick to the plan, because the only way to know if the plan is working is to stick to it. So constantly changing variety. And that's the biggest problem. Like with someone that's too small, too big, or whatever you want to call it, all it really needs is, it's easier said than done, is a little bit of patience. Like you have to create the work to create the body you want. And the body you want is the one that can do, not that can look. It's like if it were as simple as saying be 220 pounds and you'd be fine, or that's not that simple. It's
right.
What is your body doing? And that's what the PST is. The PST is showing what the body is capable of. And a lot of times, it's like I said this before off camera, it's like there's a reason why there's not 140-pound defensive linemen or defensive backs in the NFL. There's also a reason why they're not 300 pounds. Okay. Like now, buds is not a sport in of itself. However, that's what Stu is saying. The bell curve of statistics shows that, well, you're human. Because we're all human, we can be put into one graph. Okay. And that graph is just showing what physical capabilities are relative. What it's not like, it's a weird thing is, what is that bell curve showing? It's showing resiliency. That's all it's showing, right? Really, what does that bell curve show? It shows people that are resilient enough to go through that process. And it all comes down to the work, not your body size, not your body type, not your ectomorph, mesomorph nonsense. It's what you do to prepare that body for that workload. So we're saying, like, if you're like, I'm 150 pounds, your question is then, can this 150 pounds do the work necessary? And that's what the PST is testing. Okay. So if you're like, well, I need to do this and do that, like it's all relative, right? If you're 150 pounds doing 100 push-ups, you're ready. You're capable, right? Then it comes to a choice, right? And then it comes to be like, that's what we're saying durability is like, then you'll see how good your program was. It's one thing to be ready for the PST. It's a whole thing ready to be ready for that selection course. And the only way to know if you're ready for that selection course is do it. You're going to find out if your body holds up.
That is true.
The bell curve he's talking about is that. It shows all the statistics.
Yeah. And, there are typical weaknesses that come with the 150-pound person, right? I mean, unless, and this is the big unless, it's a pound for pound strength issue. I have seen 150-pound guys stronger than 210-pound guys, just because they had good technique. They were just strong because they worked at being strong. And so they didn't have those typical weaknesses that a 150-pound person would have. So, that person may not have issues being under a boat and a log for hours at a time.
Right.
Whereas someone who maybe even be 180, 190, who isn't very strong, but maybe he's better at the endurance side, you may have a harder time being under that log and under that boat for longer periods of time. It just really comes down to, like Jeff said at the very beginning, what is your history? Is it a combination of sports and work? Is it just work? Is it just sports? Is it just you working out? All of those are good answers.
Yep.
All of those are good as long as they're meeting the standard
and they're consistent. Yeah.
and they're consistent. There's not a wrong answer on that.
And see, here's the thing too, is people get real caught up in the minutia of body weight when two things aren't in place: a timeline, an appropriate timeline, and the process. Because let's say you go in at 140 of your training. If you go through good training with you and I, they're not going to be 140 when they get done with it. But also, we're not going to be saying get on the scale, because
Right.
your weight is determining your success. That is what good training does. What does drinking too much alcohol do? It does exactly what it's going to do: get you drunk. What does training properly do over the right time and distance? It gets you ready. It's like,
Yeah.
I know it's a strange comparison, but like, what does good timeline and good training yield? Every single time it yields a good product.
Yeah. And unfortunately, here's where Jeff and my frustration comes in sometimes, because we see it all the time. It's the person who joins in the military, whether it's delayed entry program for the Army or Navy or whatever, and they are nowhere near ready to take a fitness test, whatever that is. I mean, I've seen some people have joined and then they had to learn how to swim.
Yeah.
Right. That is not the time to learn how to swim, after you've enlisted and you're into the delayed entry program. You set yourself up on a timeline that may be 6 months, maybe a year. If you're a young kid that's still in high school, that's another story.
Yeah. Oh, man.
But you will have some time to prepare, but it may not be enough, especially if you're not ready when you go in there. I personally tell all the guys that are, training around us, is that think about that first PST you take as the only one that you can take.
Yeah.
Right. And it gives it a little bit more power to it, because if you go into it and you can fail 20, I mean, what's the point? I mean, think of that first one as a job interview with a person from the community that you want to join. They're grading you. I mean, that is first impressions last.
We've had someone email us that is on there that has failed 16 PSTs.
Yeah.
So here's my thought. Like, here's what this is what I fundamentally believe based on the statistics. Like, I'm a big fan of math. I'm a big believer in not just like, that's the proof of the universe. Like, it's the universal language of everything. Right. So if I can look at math and see the statistics, I'm going to favor the statistics that I know are untainted. Right. What do we know about 18-year-olds? They're fundamentally like 98% failure rate of buds. Like, that's just the way it is. Super low, right? For all the reasons, right? I would never train anyone under 20 years old to go through buds. It's just one thing we know statistically works, right? So and then we go to the next piece, we can create other standards for it, right? And one of those standards should be like, you only get one chance to take the PST. That, I think, in and of itself should absolutely be fundamental, right? You get one shot. That's it. Right? What is that going to do? That won't change anything for the people that are going to successfully navigate this course. That's the thing, is they'll improve numbers. Why? Because now you've held a higher standard that people are aware of. Higher standards always drive higher compliance.
True.
If the standard is moral, if it is what it is, and that's what buds is, it's moral, it's democratic, it's all those great things we want in a society. So that right there is huge. Because Stu, how many chances did you get? And this isn't like, oh, Jeff and Stu, no. Why did we only got one shot? What did it do? It did exactly what you're explaining.
Yeah.
I fucking took it real seriously for a year because it's like, this is my life.
Yeah.
I just don't understand how people can't do that.
I saw a great quote by Usain Bolt. He goes, I trained for 5 years to run 9 seconds. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I've trained for years for this PST.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't just show up on day one and like, okay, I'm going to take the PST. I'm already in the Navy. Let's see how it goes. You know, that's not the time to assess yourself.
No.
You know, otherwise it's not going to go well for you, no matter how wiry you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's my point of advice is like, show up with the intent of trying to impress the people that are holding the gates to the city you want in. Like, show up like really doing your best to say, hey, I gave a damn. I really gave a damn enough about to respect the opportunity to try this.
Yeah. And
That's huge.
here's what happens too. As soon as you do that, my guys always come back and say, yeah, I got it, you know, crushed it. And then, you know, the recruiter's calling them, you know, they're not having to like call the recruiter, get his voicemail. 2 weeks later, they may hear from the recruiter. You know,
Right.
you're not a serious candidate. That's what the
Yeah.
recruiter sees when you go in there and fail your PT test.
Yeah.
So it's just, don't do it.
Like look, it's silly. Like really think about it. Like, and this is where youth doesn't see. This is a job interview. Like literally a job interview, folks. Why would you not show up for the job interview prepared? You don't, and especially when the aura around special warfare is all this fucking meat eating, tough grit, blah blah nonsense. It's like all it is prepare and blah. Like it's like, why didn't you do it? Like everything is like all these silly special forces like memes that like everyone's tough and grit and blah.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, man, you didn't even fucking show up ready to do sit-ups. Like, come on. Yeah. It's silly, man. We just got a whole bunch of people that want to go to superhero school or want to be a superhero, but none of them want to go to superhero school.
I too am a fan of statistics, and I don't have exact numbers on this, but here's how a local recruiter told me it goes like this. Every male under the age of 20 walks in there, wants to be a SEAL. Okay. And he's exaggerating a little bit because not everybody wants to. And he says, okay, well, here's the PT test that you have to take. And they look at the PT test and he says, right then and there, half of them change their mind. Well, what else you got? Right. So just looking at that 500-yard swim, pull up, push up, sit ups, mile and a half already takes out a
50%.
good chunk of people who want to go to BUD/S. Right. Then you got the medical exam, you got the PT test, you got the ASVAB. That takes out another chunk of people who want to go to BUD/S. Right. And then you got the people who are passing the PT test and they get SO contracts and they go to boot camp and they finished boot camp and they were borderline. A lot of them are borderline passing that PST. They take their first PST at prep. Boom, they fail prep. They're out of the program. There's another chunk. We haven't even gotten to the people who are actually going to BUD/S yet.
Yeah.
Right. And then
We're
when they
just
go to
now getting
BUD/S,
to the serious candidates after all that nonsense.
after all that, and then you get, say, 200 people who go to BUD/S, and in the first 4 weeks, you've lost 140 of them, right? After Hell Week, you know, so there's a lot of people who think they're ready for this, you know, pathway or journey in life. They're nowhere near ready. You know, even the, you know, above average candidates, you know, who actually get to BUD/S, you know, weren't really ready to get through BUD/S.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's hard. And you can't just think, this is what I'm going to do on a whim.
I just can't, you know, like it's interesting because like I know Mitch is always like, no, I just kind of didn't even know. But what Mitch isn't telling you is
he's
the
tough
way
as
that
nails.
Mitch is Mitch. Like Mitch is vicious and had just as much ferocity as a senior and a junior in high school in sports. Like it wasn't like that this incredibly motivated individual just thought like, oh, like in his head, that's like he's playing it off, like being very modest, but
He
like
is, yeah.
he was a stellar athlete when he went into the Navy. So, it's like, but again, the big difference is someone's real depth of willingness to endure. That's it. Wouldn't it be nice to get to the selection course and that's the only thing that's being tested, like your will? And that's the difference with Stu and I, is like 100% of our people that follow our timeline and teachings are physically ready. 100% of them are. Then it comes up to your moral obligation, or whatever you want to call it, your spiritual, your whatever motivates you to get through that
how
process.
bad do you want it?
That's what you really should be testing when you show up there, your will.
Yes. Because your will be tested.
Tried to do.
There will be a moment when your will be tested. There'll be several moments.
Yes.
When you have to ask, or something in your head will say, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And you have to have a really good answer to that question. Otherwise, you're out of there, whether it's you're freezing your butt off or you're just running so hard that you're about to pass out, whatever it is. We all have those gut checks. Whether you're the wiry, strong guy, you're going to have a gut check. You're the big guy, you're going to have a gut check. You're the average size guy, there's a gut check in there for you as well. But if you can eliminate as many of those gut checks as you can, and not every single event of every single day is a personal gut check, you've just made it a little bit easier for yourself to not have to engage mental toughness to get through something, because you've relied on your preparation.
Yep, and it will. And that's the beauty, is it's the only thing that will allow your mental toughness, we'll call it, to be as heightened or as optimal as it can be, is to know that your physical is there to support your emotional state. Why else are we working out? Like, to make it less physically difficult? Yes. But if we encounter a physical distress, what is the first thing that shows up with it?
Nice.
Emotional duress. So
and
how do we minimize it?
How do you handle that?
Yeah.
Because it's going to happen.
You bet. Like, we're not saying eliminate. We're not saying at all. We're saying manage. Yeah. That's it. Like, you have got to be able to rely on skill under great duress to save your life and other people's. It's the building blocks of what the future of the community is. That's why it's a deselection, because it has to select the people that are willing to endure, regardless of their own personal plight.
Yeah.
That's the community.
Yeah. And very much like what we talked about in the last podcast, is that there's a moment when, you're ready, right? And you think you're ready, you might be ready, you might have doubts. We all had doubts going into it. Are you ready? And then when you're going through it, you're like, okay, I can do this. But there's always something that challenges you. And you can't get stronger. You can't run faster. You can't build your endurance. You can't build your muscle stamina. You might be able to work on some technique stuff at best, but there's nothing else to do but to get tougher. Right. And that is what Jeff was talking about when he says, how much can you endure every single day? And that's just how it works. You get all your strength and stamina and endurance built before you go in. You test it when you're in. And then some days you just got to rely on getting through it and being tough.
Yep. And that's the beauty of, like, now someone that's been through it, this process is, granted, it was 18 years ago, but the point is that what I can recall in hindsight is that, like, buds in itself as a collective is extremely difficult, but day in and day out, days don't get progressively harder. Now, in the physical, they do a little bit by design, that. So, like, that's a given. Gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared. We know that third phase is going to be harder than first. Got it. It's a fundamental rule of what you have to deal with. Okay. But my point is that, like, if you show up to buds physically ready and not overtrained even, right? What buds you actually adapt to buds. Buds in itself doesn't get any more difficult. because you adapt to it. You know, it's like, am I saying buds is easy? No, I'm not. What I'm saying is you show up ready to receive that stress because you prepared for a year, like a real good preparation. Your body adapts to that preparation.
Yeah.
Well, because of that preparation, you show up to buds with a whole new sense of stimulus. As soon as you adapt to that stimulus post hell week, you're like, well, now what can you throw at me?
Yeah.
From there on, it's just skill.
What are you gonna make me get
Right?
wet? Do push-ups?
Right. From then on, it's like, okay, now we gotta learn to dive. That's skill acquisition. And then we, but there's still duress. But it's based in skill development. And then you go to third phase and you learn to land navigate under duress. You learn to shoot under duress. You learn to build demo under duress. We're not
fun.
getting you already
Very
got
fun.
it. Like, yeah, and that's the thing is if you're physically capable, you go through buds learning this shit instead of like, oh my God, I got this run this morning. Oh, I got dive physics too. I got to take a test. It's like, if I'm not worried about the run, then I can just focus on the test.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, exactly. So it comes down to preparation. I know we went in a kind of a broad circle there with the conversation, kind of starting off with the small guy being wiry, but the preparation for the small wiry guy isn't any different than the preparation for everything else. There are specific things you have to prepare for, right? Your general fitness, your general history of athletics and work capability all come into that, but eventually there are some specifics that you really need to focus on, and that's to meet the standard, to exceed the standard. After that, it's just enduring the 6 months of buds, cold, wet, sandy, steep learning curve.
And thankfully that it is, right? Like I think that most people get in their heads sometimes that these sort of courses shouldn't be as difficult as what they expected. Expect it to be the most difficult thing you've ever done. And if that's the point of it, then you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. Like, don't think for a second that this is like, from a physical standpoint, buds wasn't terribly difficult for me. Like the PT stuff, like it wasn't, but it's the accumulation of the stress over 27 weeks that makes it like, how do I say that? There is an aspect of buds that everyone struggles with. My struggle is the fact that I had to go through 27 weeks of it. It wasn't like I had trouble learning anything, but that was because I was physically ready. I was able to learn. I was ready to learn. I wanted to learn and get past, learn and get on the next thing, learn and get on the next thing. And I'm thankful I was in that position rather than seeing guys that I graduated with like stressed out the whole time. Guys that had to get remediation swims every single week or to pass. Like I know our OIC and one other guy, like with great officer, great SEALs and things like that. But it's just like, there were two guys going into the last swim of third phase. It's like, you failed, right? This is it, your last chance. And so I swam with them. They both passed. We all graduated, no big deal. But it's like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be in the literally where we're doing the last run with the CO on Thursday before graduation. That morning we had to do a swim.
Wow.
3 of us. I was like, hey, Nicholas, can you guide these guys? Because this is their last chance. And I was like, well, shit. Okay. So I can't imagine being like the OIC or someone in buds, like going in the last week and go, hey man, like there's a real shot. You're not going to get through this if you don't pass this swim.
Yeah.
Oh man. Like the very first run I had in first phase, I was like, what's the time for third? That's my goal. Like, what's the time for third phase swim? That's what I want to make sure I can do all this. So just for what it's worth, that was my experience.
No, that was good. Exceeding the standard is the standard, period. You're flirting with the failures. That's a tough one.
Yeah. So.
Oh man. So, you said you're 18 years ago, you're at Buds. I just figured out it was 30 years ago. I was about 4 months away from showing up at Buds. So 30 years ago.
Because my 100 class just graduated. Yeah, Bud. So it's our thing. It's just like a lifetime away. It feels forever ago.
346 just went through Hell Week, right?
Right.
It was. Yeah, they just finished Hell Week. That was a hell of a Hell Week, from what I hear.
There was a couple guys that I trained that sent me afterward, I didn't know who was in the class, but I got a couple photos from guys. It's like the one you sent, and then I got a couple other DMs of guys that I trained at a clinic or something of some sort. So it's kind of really cool to kind of start seeing that now.
Oh, it's awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah. They had, they had a hard one. They started with like 160 plus on day one of first phase. And at the last day of Hell Week, they had 14 people.
Yeah.
So and that's a 4-week time period.
Yeah.
So in 4 weeks, they lost 148, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah. We started at 188 and got through Hell Week at 22.
Woo.
That's where we were at.
That's pretty legit.
So, but I think percentage wise, that's like every class though, more or less, right? I think, but
I was pretty shocked. I mean, they had a lot more attrition than my class had. We started with 120 and graduated 28. They went into Hell Week with 28.
Yeah.
And had 45 more people than we had to start off with.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was legit. They said they were cold.
Yeah, I think this is right. We were talking to. It's there's a difference in preparation nowadays.
Could be.
You get. I mean, not again. It's like we can go around with this, but it's like, you know, if you're prepared, you'll make it through if you decide to. And for me, is what we got all these physically capable guys potentially that aren't deciding to go through it. So I don't know what to attest to it. I'm not looking at their psyche evals either. So
no, I just, you know, there was a time there when they quit doing winter Hell Weeks for this reason, because it was just, it was decimating their numbers. And so, you know, it was a cold Hell Week, and cold Hell Weeks drop numbers.
Yeah.
You know, but there's some positives to it too. You're not as beat up either. And that you're not swollen, you know, your knees and ankles and stuff aren't all
ours
blowing up.
I remember when we went down the first night down, it sleeted down at the Nerf gate that first night. And then it rained on day 2 because we were always joking about the weather machine, and no shit, like it hadn't sleeted in San Diego in like 40 years, and it did the first night of Hell Week. Rained the second day, and then on Wednesday from then on it was like 73 and beautiful. So I remember the third day waking up in the morning, the sun was coming up, and I was like, oh, because we hadn't felt the sun the first 2 days of Hell Week. Never felt the sun. I was like, this is way better. So every Hell Week in its own right is super difficult. So it just is. It sucks. But anyways,
no kidding, man. Congrats to them.
You bet. We'll do this again though. We'll figure out another topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, thanks a lot. And so in final words, I will just say, you know, don't worry too much about your height and weight. You know, you can get through it as a small guy. You can get through it as a big guy. You're just realize there's going to be some weaknesses that you need to specifically address before you go.
So in your preparation.
In your preparation.
You're going to address it. Yeah.
Before you're in the military. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks a lot, Jeff. We'll chat with you guys later. Yep.